The official entry list for the 102nd running of the Indianapolis 500 dropped this morning. 35 cars are going to be going for 33 coveted starting spots. But we also found out this morning that one of those entries is going to have a major question mark over it before the track even opens for practice. The car number 19, Dale Coyne Racing Paysafe car. It's a Honda and was originally slated to be driven by Pietro Fittipaldi, who drove it at Phoenix and was planning on driving it for a majority of the rest of the season. Was severely injured in a spectacular crash at the Spa-Francorchamps circuit for the World Endurance Championship 6 Hours of Spa. He was qualifying his Dragon Speed SMP Racing Gibson LMP1 car when he lost control going into the Eau Rouge corner, went head-on into the wall, and severely fractured both of his legs. Now, the good news in all of this, if you can find some of it, is that the injuries to Pietro's lower extremities were not life-threatening, and he will hopefully recover to race again one day. But obviously, thoughts and prayers going out to the Fittipaldi family. Of course, Pietro was going to be another third-generation driver. His grandfather, Emerson, won the Indianapolis 500 twice in 1989 and 1993. Also won the World Driving Championship in Formula One twice. So it's a real shame on that perspective. And if you've been keeping track on Twitter and possibly IndyCar on Reddit, you may have heard that there are also some other things in the works for that entry. There's a pretty big team partnership coming for that car. Now, there is a bit of a question whether or not that is going to stay together now that Pietro Fittipaldi is out of the ride. As far as I'm aware, it was not dependent on the driver being in the car. It's more of a team partnership, but who knows what may come of that. The other major question mark over this car at this point is who's going to drive it. Now, obviously, I've heard actually a short list myself of what Dale Coyne Racing is thinking about doing. Obviously, there's going to be the names that show up, generally speaking, every time someone gets hurt. There's also the question of, well, there's a few drivers that had budgets, like Juan Pedrohita, who could not put a deal together. But, you know, if I had a choice, I'd probably put Ryan Briscoe in the car. He did a fantastic job subbing for James Hinchcliffe a couple years ago and proved that he is still a very competitive IndyCar racing driver. And I think with testing and also having the teammates Bourdais and Daly, and to a certain extent Pippa Mann as well, there's a lot of data to bounce off. It'll get him up to speed real quick. And that car could be a contender. Obviously, you know, I would kind of like Buddy Lazier to be in that car, but I don't think we're going to get a Dale Coyne Racing 1995 reunion this year. Speaking of Buddy Lazier and the fact that I called 36 entries back in February, got that wrong, darn. That was pretty much dependent on whether Buddy Lazier was going to show up or not. I think that was, with a lot of people's 36 car counts, was dependent on whether Buddy Lazier was going to show up. And unfortunately, they couldn't make it work this year. That crash damage last year actually tubbed the car, in which that means that the tub was no longer safely usable without major repairs or, you know, just to a certain extent just going out and buying a new tub. They simply couldn't put anything together for this year, and I think in a lot of ways the Laziers didn't want to put together another 2015 in which they bought a whole new aero kit, they put a car onto the track, and then they promptly got bumped. I don't think they were particularly interested in that, especially after the last couple years, 2016 and 2017, where they've had fairly decent funding to be able to at least get out on track, test the car, and last year they even outqualified 3 separate entries, which would have put them pretty easily in the field for this year's Indy 500. But from what I understand, they are definitely looking at coming back in 2019, and I have no reason to doubt them. This is actually the first year they haven't actually been on the entry list since 2013. So, you know, the Laziers are like, I guess you could say they're like cockroaches, and I can say that as a Buddy Lazier fan. They never truly go away. They may be gone for a few years, but I have faith that they will be back. So who is on the entry list then, if Buddy Lazier and Pietro Fittipaldi are not? There are 35 cars, of course. Now we've only got 34 drivers on the entry list at the moment. But, of course, there's the 22 Leader Circle cars that you're probably well aware of. They're all the full-time drivers, your Alexander Rossi's, your Ryan Hunter-Reay's, your Marco Andretti's of the world, your Joseph Newgardens of the world. But there's also some of the partial season drivers that are going to be getting a shot, such as Elio Castroneves, who's not only going to be running the Indianapolis 500, but also running the IndyCar IndyCar Grand Prix. Then, of course, you've got Juncos Racing with Kyle Kaiser. They're not quite a full-time team yet, but looks like they're putting together enough pay drivers that they may be able to actually run the full season, or at least close to it. Then you've also got Jack Harvey in the Michael Shank, or I guess Meyer Shank Racing Sirius XM Honda. That's a car out of the Sam Schmidt Motorsports stable, but it's actually not a full season entry, and it's actually being run and prepared by Michael Shank Racing. So those 25 entries put us at, of course, 25. That means there's 10 other just pretty much exclusively Indy 500 entries. So let's quickly talk about those. The first one on the list is Jay Howard, car number 7 out of the Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports entry list. Of course, he ran for them last year in car number 77 and had a very controversial coming together with Scott Dixon. He's going to be looking for serious redemption on that one. Then, of course, we go to the major media darling Danica Patrick in car number 13 with GoDaddy sponsorship. Everybody knows about that. Don't need to spend too long on it. Connor Daly driving a third Dale Coyne Racing car in association with Tom Burns Racing. That car has Air Force sponsorship. And I'd also like to think that Connor Daly's probably in with a shot at driving the 19 at the IndyCar Grand Prix, but it'll probably go to Zachary Clayman DeMello because we can have not nice things. Then we go down and a little bit further in the entry list, car number 24, Sage Karam, Dreyer Reinbold Racing. That has been a pretty much a staple on the Indy 500 entry list for the last several years. Stephen Wilson, car number 25. You may remember him last year stepping aside out of an Andretti Autosport entry to allow Fernando Alonso to run. He's got the Driven to Save Lives car. This is his biggest opportunity, easily the best team he's ever stepped in, so it'll be interesting to see what he can do. Then we've also got the other Andretti Autosport entry, which brings their stable to 6. Carlos Munoz driving car number 29. You may remember that from last year with Fernando Alonso as well. And he has Ruhoff Home Mortgage sponsorship, which, of course, last year Takuma Sato took to victory lane. Carlos Munoz has no slouch at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Seconds and third places, and he's got the car that can potentially win it again with Andretti Autosport. You can't count any of those guys out. I wouldn't even count Stephen Wilson out. You know, he's been out of the car for a couple years. He did run in 2016, but you just never know with the Andretti Autosport team. As we've seen last 2 years, they've put probably the most unlikely driver out of their team into victory lane. So that's how that goes. Then we go down through the rest of the field. Third AJ Foyt entry, and this is fairly interesting. James Davison, car number 33. This is an association with Belardi Auto Racing and the Birds, which last helped Brian Clausen get to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. The interesting thing about Davison is he's never really had a whole lot of practice at the Indianapolis 500. He puts the car in the show, and then he goes out and races, and a lot of times he's one of the most spectacular drivers out there. So is he a potential race spoiler? I certainly would think so, especially considering the pace we've seen out of the AJ Foyt team, especially from Tony Kanaan. If he can drive Kanaan's setup, there's no reason to think that James Davison's not going to be at the front. Now, will he stay there? Will he be able to keep the car out of the wall? That'll be the question mark. Then we go down another Indy-only entry, kind of a staple, Pippa Mann at Dale Coyne Racing. Nothing really to say about that. Outside of the car is not pink anymore; it's blue. Then we've got Oriol Servia driving the third Rahal Letterman Lanigan car. Interesting to know about this entry. It's actually a partnership with Scuderia Corsa, the IMSA Ferrari team for GTD, and Scuderia Corsa has, from what I understand, every intention of entering IndyCar in the next couple of years. Then we go down to J.R. Hildebrand, teammates to Sage Karam at Dreyer Reinbold Racing, and JR is one of the best ones at Indy in terms of a driver. So if Dreyer and Reinbold can get the setup, I think both Karam and JR can be up near the front, and I think JR can be a bit of a calming influence on Sage as well, because Sage has kind of been a lone wolf for the last few years after getting fired from Ganassi. So maybe having a teammate who's very, very smart, MIT accepted driver, I think he'll be all right in terms of that. And that's all the Indy 500 only entries. A couple more things kind of interesting on the entry list. Matthias Leist is actually entered as Matt Leist on the entry list for number 4 AJ Foyt Racing. That's actually a funny nickname his team gave him to make him more American, because that's how the AJ Foyt team rolls. Because it's kind of funny that they kind of pranked him on that one and actually put that on the entry list. The other notable thing is that Charlie Kimball actually has a different sponsor for this race. It's FISA, which is another insulin injection or insulin delivery system. We've seen the Novolog car go through several livery changes over the last few years. This is no different, and this is an artist rendering of pretty much what the car will probably look like. At least it's got the colors of the insulin pin on it, so expect something that looks somewhat similar to that. It's going to be pretty interesting, a dark blue and yellow car. We really don't have that on the entry list at the moment, but yeah, 35 cars. Going to be pretty interesting. It wasn't as big of an entry as some of us maybe thought it was going to be, but we're going to have a bump day. Practice days are going to be incredibly important in terms of getting things right so that you don't get bumped. Let me know down in the comments who you think is going to get bumped out of that list. Who do you think maybe the early favorite in terms of being able to possibly not only surprise but win the thing? Because again, you look at the Indy 500 entry list over the last few years, probably 15 drivers and cars could win the race. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube, and we'll see you for more Indy 500 content in the next video.